everybody. Welcome to the Truth Will Set You Free show, brought to you by TLBTV and the Liberty Beacon Project. I'm your host, Linda Diane Wattley, and yes, I am excited again. We have a very special guest today. Her name is Hillary Harris. How you doing, Hillary?
I'm doing great, Linda. I am so excited to be here.
We are both excited. I was just telling Hillary, you try to prepare yourself for your guests because they deserve the best. And Hillary is so authentic, so surreal. And I just feel so like God loves me today, because to find someone that is as open as she is a rarity. She does
I appreciate that.
things for humanity. She does so many things for humanity. She come out of the box. Now, I am a person who is sci-fi. Outer Limits, Lost in Space, Enterprise, Twilight Zone. I love that type of stuff because it takes you away from this world that it's not fulfilling, no matter what you do. So when you have a chance to leave that world and just go somewhere else and just enjoy that energy and be fed, you have to get excited. I'm excited about Hillary because Hillary is not afraid of dimensions. I gotta let you know, she is not afraid of dimensions. And another thing about her, she has not anything to hide. And I am just so looking forward to what she had to share for us today, because I kind of feel like you're going to find it very interesting. First of all, I want to say that Hillary is very sensitive. And it's a powerful sensitive because she's open to grow and to grow others. And to be able to do that, sometimes you have to go into things that people don't find normal. And when you can do something like that, I find you amazing. She is the founder of Soul Purpose. And what her purpose is she wants to draw people to their best selves. She wants people to realize we're all supposed to prosper. We're not supposed to be a slave to money. And what she wants you to realize is your value. And the thing that I liked about Soul Purpose is what she called when you are in line with your purpose. Now I have to read this. I can't remember this here. But she says, when who you are is in total agreement, harmony, alignment with your dreams, desires, and passions, your values, morals, choices, and actions, you are being your soul purpose. And I found that to be important for people to realize, because there's so many of us hoping to be in our purpose. And to me, if you get what that said, you know if you are there or getting there or you need to get there. And that controls her life. That's why she created Soul Purpose. Her mission is to touch lives, to get people to awaken, to be at a better place. To me, she reminds me of what Dr. Dwyer said. He said, we are spiritual beings having human experiences. We're not human having spiritual experiences. And it's time for us to acknowledge that reality. She lives in that reality. She vibrates that reality. She also is known as original prosperity coach. It's like, okay, you heard of people preaching and talking about prosperity, but she is known to be the A1. She's going to get you there. She's going to find out why you're not there, because it's something that you have to align to get you where you have to go. Because people are so caught up in money, they don't realize it's not about the money. It's about who and what you are. And she reinforces that on her base. She also has an awesome podcast, Ascension 360 Degrees. It's known globally around the world. People rely on her show just to survive what we are going through today. We're going through a lot of transitions. And she kind of soothes your spirit, especially with the restlessness that we're experiencing today. So what she had to share today, I really feel like you should pay attention, because you might be surprised you're more normal than you realize, right?
Absolutely.
When you talk about ascension, what do you mean by that?
That's a really good question, Linda. First of all, I just want to tell you and your listeners, when you talk about being out of the box and being out there in your spatial interests, it's coming to the earth, so you don't have to go anywhere. So buckle up, everybody, right? And when I speak of ascension, most people think of it as in the biblical sense, where we would know to leave our bodies, right? That the spirit or the soul would leave the body and move to a higher state of consciousness. What's happening now, and what we understood would be happening in these times, is that the body is taking the physicality with us to higher levels of consciousness. So this is actually not us moving off the planet. It's our bodies moving into higher levels of consciousness, but also not only the planet, but the entire universe moving into a higher space of consciousness. So everything is experiencing an upshift, upward, into higher dimensionality. This is something that is unprecedented. All beings across all multiverses are watching this, because it's sort of a curiosity. I kind of joke and think of them, with their popcorn going, oh, this is getting really good. What's going on here? What are these humans going to do? But it is the process of awakening and expanding into our, what I call, higher human divine essence. So we're raising the level of our humanity. And I know it may not look like it, but we are really raising our level of humanity and recognizing our divinity. So it's a both and. A lot of people misunderstand that we're, need to shed the ego and get rid of all the things that make us human. But, as you said, we're having a human experience. There is a purpose to us being here. So the ascension, or the great shift, or the upshift, is this process of both experiencing our planet as human, but raising that to a higher level of consciousness, while we also learn how powerful we are as our divine nature, as our divine selves, as parts of and the whole of what we might call God, God source, Buddha, whatever it is that you refer to that as. That's completely fine. It really doesn't matter. But it's just the remembrance of that, the recognition of that, and then the ultimate understanding of how to use that power, of course, for good, right?
And it's strange that you mentioned those different religions, because I was going to ask you, a person believing in Christianity, how do you tie that into Christianity? Because they talk about resurrection, being dead and then coming back to life, going either or, heaven or hell. So how do you tie that into reality?
Well, that's a really good point also. I think that there was a lot of misunderstanding even about first of all, the concept of Jesus the Christ, right? There's a whole misunderstanding about what that means. Jesus as the light, right? Bringing the light. What is the returning of that meaning, as opposed to a physical being returning, as a meaning the light, the return of the Christ consciousness, which is the light. I have a response to this in two ways. If somebody is deeply religious and it works for them, fine, go for it. As long as you embrace it and it feels good to you and it expands you in a way that allows you to continue to grow. However, what we're going to be seeing more and more of, and more of the conversations that I have, certainly with the people that I've worked with over the past 20 years, is that the religion, whatever that religion may be, doesn't support and fulfill them, because it brings in too many rules, too many regulation, too much judgment, too much, I'm a sinner. How come I was born a sinner? Why is this taking me outside of an understanding of me being powerful, as opposed to being at the whim of the power of something outside of me? So there is some stress that's going on, and we've seen this within the Catholic Church, for example. There's a lot of breakdown inside of religion. Not that it has to necessarily disappear, but it has to shift and evolve, just like everything else does. We are following doctrine that's eons old. And if we're going to both, it's kind of a term that I learned when, when I began working with highly evolved beings. I had mentioned this to you, working with dragons, that they refer to themselves as newly ancient. So we really need to look at even religion in that sense as newly ancient. How are we going to take ancient understandings and bring it into the new so that we're not limited? Religion can be divisive. And so if it's something that causes people to be divisive, that I would encourage them to take a look. Too much division is what's creating the breakdowns, the jihads, the hate, the fear-mongering. And so how can we return to that sense of Christ consciousness, which is really based in love, right? All religions need to return to that understanding of basis in love. And if we can find the commonality there, right? The common community there, we're going to have that shift of consciousness that we've been looking for.
Okay, I want to ask you this question too. It's kind of to the left a little bit, but why is humanity going through a stage in life where children's lives are so compromised? I mean, from the ground up, from the home to the government, it's like there's nothing protecting the children. There's nothing that's placing them in a higher place with mankind. How can we shift without them?
Very good question. And I'm going to answer this in two ways. And it always makes me laugh because whenever I work with my clients, I always say two things. I've always threatened to write a book called Two Things, because I always say I have two responses to that. And I think it has to do with one of the things I've realized about the information that comes through me is that I'm able to hold multi-perspectives. That's that multi-dimensionality, to bring in a number of perspectives, because there's never just one way, right? We have so many different perspectives, religions, ways of being in the world, traditions, cultures. We need to be able to be very open-minded. There are two main tracks that I want to take with this. One is that the children that have come to the planet, starting in the 60s and some in the 50s, late 50s, 60s, 70s, called star seeds, indigo children, crystal children, and they bring, again, a new high sensitivity. So a lot of the children that were diagnosed with ADD, these children don't need Ritalin. They aren't afflicted with something wrong with them. They bring a higher consciousness. They understand things very quickly, right? They don't need to do all the steps in a math problem. They already know the answer. They don't need to show the work because for them, that's pointless. They just want to get to the point and move forward. They don't come with all the baggage. We are trying to apply an old way of dealing with life and with issues and challenges to new children who come with purity, right? They come with, again, that newly ancient understanding of what needs to happen to the planet. The challenges that you're talking about that are being then applied to these very sacred, very wise, and also very squirrely kids, because what do we do with these kids, right? And what kind of planet are we going to leave them? The point is that it affects them so that we will wake up, right? In other words, what strikes at the heart? For some people, it's animals. For other people, it's children. It's the innocence. What will we leave? Human beings are historically very stubborn. So those of us who have come to make the shift, we have been waiting and hoping that it would happen 10 years ago, 5 years ago. What's happening? Why is it taking so long? And, quite frankly, a lot of us are exhausted. But when we take a step back and we say human beings are historically stubborn, we have egos, it takes time. There's the process of spiral, 2 steps forward, 1 back, 1 forward, 2 back. Why is this, why is there denial about things? Why is there so much hanging on? We need to find things that awaken us in different ways. One way is children, because that strikes at the heart, right? It opens the heart. So anything that's going to break the heart open with particularly stubborn humans is highly effective, because one of the things that I've been saying for 20 years, particularly about prosperity, but it's true about consciousness, and I'll say why in a minute, is an open heart, right? The channel to all things is an open heart. Through that heart chakra, but the high heart chakra is the high frequency through which all connectivity flows. Front of the heart, back of the heart chakra, this is what we want to have open. I've always said that prosperity is directly connected to the openness of your heart. But that frequency and vibration is also in alignment with the highest frequencies of love, of collaboration, right? Of communing, of community, of gathering together, of peace, of harmony. So it's all connected. But if you put it onto something that's important to people, like money, it's a very, very powerful symbol, right? It wakes people up. It gets people's attention, as does children. So that's another way to have people wake up. It's unfortunate that we have to have things strike at the heart. But again, notice that statement. It has to strike at the heart. We have to break people open in order to get them to come together. And this is just part of how humanity operates. Is it something I wish didn't have to happen? Yes, but not everybody's going to awaken spiritually, right? Not everybody is going to have a consciousness awakeness at the spiritual level. Some people are going to have it through suffering. Some people are going to have it through very tangible loss, right? Some people will lose everything. And then they'll say, and then I had an awakening, right? I had my come to Jesus moment. Some people will have a near-death experience who never had a religious experience, for example, at all. So we're going to come to ways of this expansion on different paths because we're that diverse.
So tell me this, when you think about a person who is a social psychopath, is there hope for them?
That's also a really good question. This is a tricky answer. And this is why I say, buckle up, people. And, I've had very, sometimes squirrely conversations with my clients about this, and they often get upset. And I've covered this sometimes in my podcasts and my radio shows. Think about these individuals as with any individual who is a challenge to your consciousness, to your belief system, or to your sense of morality or sense of integrity, as a light bringer, as an awakener, as a catalyst. Think of it from the soul perspective. So again, this is why I always bring the two perspectives. There's the human perspective and the soul perspective. And the human in me wants to sit right next to you, Linda, and go, yeah, no, lock them up. Oh, yikes. Is there hope?
Yeah, I agree with that one.
and sometimes there is. It depends on their purpose. But then I also have to remember that there are conversations that happen soul to soul, tables of souls, if you will, right? Again, communing before they come onto the planet, where they make decisions to say, I'm going to be the jerk that sets that particular path of history in motion to make a ripple or a wave or a tsunami in history to make the change. I'll be the one. Now, from my soul perspective, that is a soul to be honored, right? Because the soul is throwing itself under the bus to be seen as the psychopath that we are going to lock up or kill.
I was getting ready to say.
Or stone.
Yeah.
But certainly they become the pariah of society. And yet on a soul level, they will be honored. Now, let me say why that is. And you've got to think about this from a divine perspective. From the divine, there is nothing wrong. All pieces of that being, right? All sparks of the divine are sacred. They're all sparks of the divine. And people ask me this question too about, evil and how do we deal with that? We have to remember that all of it is in design to create catalysts, pressure points that allow us to awaken. Do we wish it wasn't happening? Yes, we absolutely do. And it's part of the reason why there are conversations that need to be had about what's going on across the planet now in this country, every country on every level, whether we're talking about terrorism, politics, healthcare, all the breakdowns that are happening that feel like pushback. And my analogy is a slingshot, right? So think about if you have something that you want to sling, right? It can be a pebble, it can be a rock. What do you have to do with that slingshot, right? You load it in and you pull it back. And the further you pull it back, boing, the further it's going to get projected forward. Right now, we're in a very severe pullback. So what we're seeing is pulling back. All the things that we work so hard for, right? Equality across the board, whether it's women, whether it's what color you are, whatever it is that looks like a horrible setback, is the pullback to the accelerated jump forward. But we have to be able to recognize that. Not everybody will. People listening to me now, once they listen to your show, will say, she's crazy. That's okay. I've been called worse. You know, I mean, this is part of my work. You know, I work with dragons. What are you going to do? You know, you do this work long enough and you recognize that there are going to be those voices that are necessary to kind of allow humanity to step forward onto those stones in the water that don't look so stable at first. But that is the direction that we're moving. There is light at the end of the tunnel. So those individuals are hand selected. And you know, sometimes it literally makes me sick to talk about it in that way. But we do have to remember that there's divinity that's in place there, and that every soul that's here now has chosen to be in connection with that particular being in order to assist in moving us forward in some way, no matter how we handle it. You know, that's not to say that person shouldn't be punished. There aren't, you know, there has to be consequences. But again, what's the awakening of that? What's the process? Do we need to recognize about gun laws or whatever it is that that person has done? You see what I mean? It's part of the awakening process. Will we learn? Are we going to awaken in the way that allows us greater integrity and coming together? Or is it going to push us further apart?
You know, you have mentioned dragon. Tell us about dragons so we can understand, as you relate back to dragons, that they can understand exactly what you're saying.
Okay, so about 5 years ago now, I was so exhausted. I was working on raising my light body and doing, you know, more expansion and just digging deeper and deeper into my work. But I had experienced a lot of loss, which so many people have and continue to do, right, as we clear out what is no longer necessary. And my mentor at the time had said that your spiritual guides, you're so tired that your spiritual guides are tired. They can't even support you. And I was like, what?
Wow.
I did not know that was possible, that light beings can actually get tired. This is indeed the case. And she said, we need to bring in, you know, bigger guns, for lack of a better term. And I said, what does that mean? And she said, well, we're going to do a guided visualization and find out. Long story short, at the end of that guided visualization, we brought in a bigger support for me. And at my feet, I saw a dragon. This launched a process of me figuring out, what is this? What is this energy? What is this visitation, right? What are these beings that are showing up? And what I discovered is that they came here to partner. There's two paths here with dragons and dragon energies. The dragons themselves have come here to partner with us in this process, to assist us in the upshift. They are extremely powerful beings, just like anybody would call on an angel or any kind of guide. However, they are very, very high dimensional beings. They bring an integrity with them. They bring a power and an understanding. And there's a whole level of misunderstanding from, again, that ancient way of dealing with dragons. I mean, we killed them all off. So they understand how humanity has to evolve beyond that old way of destruction. And so they come newly. They don't refer to the past. They want us to move forward, and they bring pristine new frequencies. So instead of the violet flame or pink light or green light that people may be very familiar with, that we bring in for certain things, like green light for prosperity, for example, or certain colors for healing, or the violet flame, for example, for healing. They bring these new, very, very high dimensional, pristine frequencies that work very quickly and work in different ways. I teach courses about that and explain a lot more about this because it's quite extraordinary, quite fascinating. But there's an opportunity to also partner with your dragon. People that I refer to as dragon worthy, because not everybody's ready to partner. It's kind of like if you are adopting an animal or if you're getting married, not everybody's ready to engage in that kind of commitment. And you have to see yourself not as a victim, but as self-sovereign. In other words, you are whole and complete. They don't come to save you, right? They don't come to rescue because you're in trouble. They come because you need assistance, but you also see yourself as a self-sovereign, strong being. So you have to hold a level of vibration that is powerful. So it's really quite something to work with these beings and to connect people with their dragons. And that happened to be something that I learned that I could do very early on. At the same time, the other track of that is teaching us about the inner dragon nature. So I'm talking about owning your power. They teach very much about how we have this inner essence, inner fire, that is both what they call the fire and the nice, right? So when do we release the fire? And that can be anger, but it's also passion and also the nice. Dragons are very family oriented. They're very heart based. The fire comes from integrity and nobility. And so you have to know when to breathe it with respect and full integrity. So they teach us about how to unleash that and embrace that within ourselves. So it's both internal and working with that energy, that external, that essence of dragondom, if you will, as well. It's quite extraordinary stuff.
So do you have any privacy?
Another very good question. I work with a lot of animal communicators and they say, how do I do this? Because they're always interrupting me. Yes. And that's the thing is that, again, because they see us as full partners, this isn't about them directing me or me directing them. And you have to have good boundaries. You have to know when to set boundaries and when to call upon them or when it's okay to be interrupted, right? Or when to be in that communing.
So when were they useful for you?
Well, for absolutely anything and everything. I learned that I could do work with both humans and animals to do what I call bringing to wholeness. That's sort of the old form of healing. They don't use that word because that assumes that there's something wrong that needs to be fixed. But I certainly call upon them and we work together to help people get their vibration back into a space of wholeness, animals as well. But again, bringing those frequencies to the planet, very powerful stuff, and also helping to raise the consciousness and balance the vibration that's on the planet at this time. They also are teaching us so much about how to shift the way that we, you mentioned a lot about reality, how we're creating reality and what's off planet, that you like to be in that realm of what's off planet. The thing they need us to understand, and this is what's so interesting about working with this, before I had a dragon show up, I was never into anything like that. I mean, sure, I loved Star Trek and Star Wars, but you mentioned dragons to me, I'd be like, what? What do you mean, Dungeons and Dragons? And certainly I was connected with angels, but not one of those people that have angels all over my house or, not that kind of energy to me at all. So I had to understand that this is about bringing that to Earth, that's not that sense of that there's some other reality, like people think, oh, you're living in some other reality, meaning you're crazy, right? It really is understanding how to move into different dimensions or realities and be multi-dimensional, right? In other words, being in more than one dimension or reality at the same time. So when people ask me, when I say I work with dragons, they're like, oh, you mean like kimono dragons, right? Or, Komodo dragon or not real dragons, right? I'm like, yeah, no, real. But they don't exist. Oh, okay. So what reality are we creating? Right? So where are you willing to go with that? What are you willing to embrace? What is your truth? Are you willing to engage with that energy? Most people can't because they are 16th dimensional beings and beyond. They always have me say and beyond. By the way, they have a great sense of humor. They are, I mean, that's the other thing, that they bring this sense of humor that is just unbelievable. But they are such high frequency that most people can't embrace it or see it. This is the challenge of raising our frequency of the ascension as it is. We are moving into higher dimensional spaces. And so it requires us to suspend our disbelief or our belief, right? We do have to step outside of what we think. Those people who created Star Wars, Star Trek, all those different shows, E.T., I don't believe these people are imagining anything. I think that they're bringing their multidimensional and perhaps otherworldly or reincarnated self to this planet to have us understand this is what exists. What are you willing to believe? You know, people who believe in extraterrestrials, where do you think that comes from? We have to stretch our mind. We think that we're the only thing that exists in not only a galaxy that is so huge we can't even fathom it, but we're talking about multi-dimensions, dimension upon dimension, galaxy upon galaxy, universe upon universe, and we're the only thing going. Right? So we've got to expand our understanding of this. In fact, I saw something recently about the mission to Mars, and the suggestion was that we have actually already been, because they have found evidence there that there's been a nuclear explosion. And so that we've already been there and that we're just replaying a program, right? So our journey there is something that has been replayed. We're replaying it. It's kind of like living in the matrix, living in the loop. I got to tell you, that really upset me because I'm like, I don't want to relive that loop. I don't want to do that again. I want to break out of it and invite people into other possibilities. What connections have people had? Have they heard things? Have they heard people who have crossed over in their lives, in their homes? Have they seen things? Did I really see that? What did they really see? What aren't they willing to believe? And all that stands in the way is that human part of us that says that's not possible. That's really all that is. And so part of the dragon work too has been allowing not just me, but those that engage with this work to expand beyond our limitations and to have us understand that being a multidimensional being means that we are all powerful. We have the ability to create and to be anything and anywhere. Now the trick is, and this is the trick, Linda, there's a lot of people that won't have that power and we don't want them to, right? Because what would they do with it? Right? So it has to really be used with integrity. We got to, blowing our minds is one thing. It's then what do you do with it once you piece it back together?
But how do you come to that realization that that's the true power when you look at the world, it's like money is the power?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And I think what you have to do is really boil it down to the questions that you've been asking when you look at what's really important. Or you look at anybody that's ever been brought to their knees. Are they really looking at money as the answer or the issue? Right? You don't really hear people say that. When they're really brought to their knees, even people who don't believe in a God will say, I said a prayer. And we know that people are fundamentally looking for that inner experience. Now, we can call it love. We can call it whatever you want to label it. But people are looking for some sort of interconnectedness where they don't feel alone, which has nothing to do with money. And it's so funny because I also know after many years of doing this, I've worked with millionaires and people who have nothing. And they all have the same issue. In fact, the millionaires that I've worked with have said, please tell those who don't have money that money makes you really, it can mess you up and can make you really miserable. And it's not about that. It's about the spirit. and how your spirit can get really lost when you have a lot of money. So if I could bottle that up, I would give it to you. That's what they all tell me, which is very, very interesting. That is one of the things that we've come to worship, right? Is this idea that money is going to answer it all. It's become the great or new God, right? The new millennial God, or perhaps not the new millennial, but the recent millennial God that we worship. And yet it's not really getting us anywhere. It's empty. And so we have to move beyond that. And the key, again, really isn't about judging it. One of the new conversations that I've had with people, when I say new, I'm talking about in the past 10 years, is that it's not about judging it as bad. That's the thing. It's just a tool like anything else. It's purely about unhooking ourselves from the fact that there's a lack, right? That there's a lack anywhere, because we've just hooked onto that one thing that we think we have to have. And yet when we have it, most people are not satisfied with it. That's the great illusion.
Wow. Yeah, I see that.
And that's why I say that the definition that I now work with prosperity is that you always have everything that you need. You're always taken care of. If that's something that one repeats again and again, and this really is how it works in the new dimension. The old way of abundance, and again, I've worked with people on prosperity and money specifically in the old third dimensional space and in the new, and I've seen a very dramatic, specific delineated shift in this. The old way was about hoarding, right? It was about amassing wealth, gathering wealth. If you had, and you had a lot, that meant something, and you could sleep at night, and it was a definition of prosperity and abundance. And by the way, you still see it. You still see that conversation happening. When I first started out, people weren't talking about what I was talking about. Now everybody's talking about it. The problem is that conversation doesn't work in this new dimensional space, right? So I predict that you'll see people saying, well, that doesn't work. Now what? So they weren't talking about energy and the money of energy 5-10 years ago. Now they're talking about it, but they're applying the old way, which means amassing. How can I help you make 6 figures? By looking at the energy of money, right? So again, it's still about, you need to make a lot of money, but use the energy of money in order to do that. So you're using third dimensional concepts with new dimensional concepts. Doesn't work. The idea is this, and again, this is the analogy that I use. Think of a glass of water and your tap. Now, when you're thirsty and your glass is empty, what do?
Feel it.
Right. You go to the tap, you turn it on, and you fill it. When the glass is full, what do you do to the tap?
You turn it off.
You turn it off. Because if you didn't, what would happen?
Overflow.
It overflows. Do you need that in that moment? Why not?
Because it's full already.
It's full. So you drink it, and you're not thirsty anymore in that moment. Now, when you're thirsty again, what do?
You go refill it.
You go refill it. And we're trusting, and I realize that, I always have to point this out because there will be somebody that points it out. Well, what about the water shortage? Let's leave that aside for a moment. For the sake of this example, you don't freak out every moment that when I go back to the tap, it's not going to be there, right? You turn it on, there it is. You turn it on, there it is. That's how the new dimension works. Because in the old way, amassing money, I have to gather and gather and hoard and gather and gather. That's coming from fear. If there's only 2 states of being, fear or faith, that sense of I have to have enough because I might run out, is that fear or faith? Right? You're coming from fear. Fundamentally, that's an energy of I must hoard. I must have enough. Oh my gosh, what if I don't have enough for college, for my children? What if I don't have enough for retirement? I must hoard. I can't spend that because what if? Fundamentally, we had built a society on fear, lack, scarcity. The universe is now requiring us, and this is why so many people are in a space of lack right now. They're losing and they're being asked to trust, so that we can learn that analogy of the tap. The universe will always provide for me. In time, on time, every time, right? That's a science of mind principle. In time, on time, every time. That is divine timing. You do not need to have more than enough, because it will be overflowing and it's a waste. And we don't want to waste water, for God's sake. We do not want to waste it. So just let it come in perfect timing. And perfect timing doesn't look like human timing. So a lot of people have said, well, oh my gosh, have you ever noticed that I'm in need of paying that bill, and boop, all of a sudden the money shows up. Or I'm in need of an opportunity, and boop, all of a sudden that phone rings and there it is. That's new dimensional faith. That's abundance. That's living in abundance. I always have everything I need. I will always be taken care of. So if that's the case, there's no worry. There's no need for worry.
So how does that work in Puerto Rico for where they are?
Well, that's another good question. Yeah, this is the thing, is that we are seeing massive cleansings all over the planet. And again, I'm going to talk about this in 2 tracks. And again, it's not to say that Puerto Rico did anything wrong. Puerto Rico is not being punished. But we are seeing places that need clearings. And it's just an energy. It's just a vibration that needs a clearing out. And so we're going to continue to see that shakings up on the planet. But also, what do we need? We need a wake-up call, right? We need a wake-up call of community. And we're going to keep getting the wake-up call of community. If there are places where the focus isn't about unity or common unity, there's going to be places that continue to need our attention. And the weather is part of that, because it's the planet. The planet is part of all of this. We keep seeing ourselves in separation from. We can master weather. I am separate from weather because I am inside, and that is outside. I am separate from nature. This is a massive, it's not a restructuring, but I have to put it that way, because it's a reconfiguration of our thinking. But our ancestors understood that we are one with nature. And again, if you look at nature, and again, with the dragon work, I've also connected with elementals, all animal beings, in very significant ways. Because if you look at how animals deal with nature, there's always enough, right? They understand. They don't freak out that winter's coming. They do what they need to do. They hibernate, they gather, they eat, they sleep, and they know that there will be cycles to it. So we can learn from nature. We can understand that there are cycles to things. There are seasons to things. So we need to understand that Puerto Rico is calling us to something. The earthquakes in Mexico are calling us to something. The hurricanes and all the flooding that we had in Texas, in Florida, these are calling us to wake up to things that we need to pay attention to. So ultimately, there is a thread to all of these things, and we have to trust. If we go into, this is going to break us, this is going to break our spirit, we can move into that space. And that is part of what creates depression, like the Great Depression, right? Where we fall into this space of lack and scarcity. But again, what it's doing is it continues to break us open, break our hearts open, so that we can rebuild what wasn't working. All of these processes that aren't getting enough attention, there's going to be divine intervention, if you will, that brings the attention to these places so that we can pull together. We can help people in Puerto Rico, if you're across the planet, by sending your positive prayer and intention. If you can't send money, send positive prayer and intention. If you want to volunteer, volunteer. In other words, do what you feel drawn to do. But the spirit of that needs to be held inside of, this is bringing us together, not tearing us apart. Because it would be very easy right now to look at the sky is falling, everything is falling apart. This really is the great shakedown. And I know it looks terrible. The one thing we have to remember is there is more light on the planet now than darkness. And, again, the analogy that I use, because I like to give images for people to have. Think about when you dust. I don't know about you, but I don't like to dust. But when I do dust, what happens? What happens to the dust?
It goes away.
Well, first, doesn't it get kicked up everywhere?
Yeah, all depends what you use, because I used to, it sucks it right in.
That's good. I need to find out what you use.
Dust in the air. I have to have that one that sucks it right on.
That's right, the HEPA. Yeah. Well, if you dust on top of a table, right, the dust gets all kicked up and you can see it. And that's what's happening right now, is all the darkness is getting pushed up to the surface. We take in so much light right now. The eclipse, the solar flares, certainly the totality, right? The solar eclipses that we have coming in. This brings in huge energies. All of the full moons and the new moons that are just increasing in intensity every month. This is actually bringing more light to the planet. It's bringing in that intensity. It builds it up. And so that dust gets pushed up and it creates all this, what feels like chaos. The weather patterns and intensities are pushing up. And look, we can't deny that we are in a time of change, weather-wise. I mean, we can look at global warming as well as part of it, for sure. But we also have to know that we are at a point in our planetary history where the weather is changing. So that is also going to create change. We need to adapt to that. We need to be aware that that's happening and work with it instead of against it, right? How can we partner with our planet, the planet as an energy, as an entity with us? And instead of feeling like it's an enemy, right, and working against us, how can we partner with her? Because one of the things that I know about Gaia, right, the beautiful planet that we live on, she is so extraordinary, is she knows how to adapt.
So, you know how they making it seem like mankind is being punished for how we handle this planet. Is that a fact, or is it just the planet reacting or controlling what it wants to happen?
I feel like, well, first of all, I don't think there's any punishment. I think, again, that's a construct of a power play, which is very unfortunate that we would be, it's kind of like that we're sinning, or that, that we've done something wrong and so we're being punished for it. Again, it's two things that we have to look at. One, it's natural planetary change, and also we are contributing to it. I think that the global warming is something that we cannot deny. We are absolutely contributing to it, and we have to pay attention. So mankind needs to be a responsible partner with the planet. We are not separate from. We are made up of stardust. We are made up of this planet and of the sun and of all of the planets that make up our galaxy. We have to get that's in our makeup. And so we are one with that. We can't think of ourselves as separate from. So we have to be responsible stewards, both for the planet, but also partners with the planet, and recognize that we are both responsible for, right? But we are also experiencing those changes with. So it's a both and experience. We don't want to beat ourselves up for it, but we definitely need to be conscious and loving about how we resolve it. If we beat ourselves up for it, we just keep creating the same old patterns.
So what is the goal for humanity that's calling for ascension?
Well, that's a really, it's so funny when I think about it, because I know that I came kicking and screaming to this planet. Those of us who are here, I believe all of us here signed up to be here, some as observers, some as real light players or light warriors, or whatever you like to call yourself. And some of us are some are very disillusioned by what's going on here, because this has been seen as a great experiment. What exactly is happening here? And I think that's a really good question. I ask myself a lot, what is the point of this all? Are we trying to return to where we came from? Or are we trying to enjoy our experience? I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Michael with John Travolta.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love that movie.
Angel.
Yeah, it's such a great thing where he's, spoiler alert, people, he's an angel. John Travolta plays this extraordinary angel, and he smokes and he drinks, and, he's taking advantage of the human experience, because as an angel, they don't have those experiences, right? On the other side, and again, higher dimensional space, they don't have pizza and burgers and, this kind of pain. It's a different experience. There is growth, by the way. There is growth and expansion, which is part of why we're here. But they don't have this. And I love when he's looking out over the fields of Montana and he's smoking, it's, like 9 in the morning or something, and he's smoking a cigarette and drinking a beer, and he says, this is what I'll miss, right? So I think it's a good question. I think that we came here in this particular time to expand the experience of humanity. And I do feel like it is, in a way, an experiment. We could get into a very rich conversation about how there are evil forces working on the planet that are trying to hold us down and control us and have implanted us with all sorts of things. I mean, there are so many different kinds of interesting conversations that people have about who we are as a species. We're part reptilian, or we're part alien, or we're part this and that. I just love all these conversations, particularly as we talk about it in terms of Star Trek or, anything like that, because these are intergalactic stories that are being told. I think that the point now is to understand if we can return ourselves to a place of peace, harmony, and love without blowing ourselves up. And that's not an easy task, because, that boils it down to kind of a crude way. I could wax, poetic about, we're here to love one another and kumbaya. But we really have to realize is that human being, for as complex as we are as beings, and there's a lot of beings on the planet, and there are a lot of species that do have a say. I have clients who communicate with whales and elephants and the dolphins, and they are very intelligent beings. The way that they work with their tribes, their herds, and the adaptations that they've made. In fact, I just saw something on the internet with elephants that have adapted to drinking and feeding at night to avoid poaching. These are not unintelligent beings. They are making adjustments based on what man and woman has done to the planet. Very, very wise beings. So, while I would like to assist humanity in this incredible upshift into our higher source, and that really is the big vision, that the point is that we get how powerful we are. I think that we need to also take it one day at a time and really work on some kindness toward one another, really learning how to understand diversity, and allow other people and other beings to live in harmony, make choices, and not harm one another. I think we have to start there. Is the big picture still in my soul's heart? Absolutely. But I know that if I wake up every day with that and then recognize what's going on the planet, I might decide to leave the planet as well. I say, I'm out of here, pull the plug now, I'm done. And I think that, again, that's why some of us have been given certain interesting gifts. Certainly I'm not, as you said, your average Joe working with dragons, because I do get pushback from people for sure. But it also, that level of working with something so extraordinary also has allowed me to see the ordinary in extraordinary ways. So I think that that's, when you think about where we came from, as evolving beings, to be able to find just that little bit of kindness. I believe that if everybody had an ability to love themselves or accept themselves, even a little bit, the planet would shift, right? The planet would shift. That's not, it's not, I always say it's simple, but it's not easy, right? And so it's little changes that make the biggest difference. So the big example of that, what's the big purpose of ascension? It is to return us to our God essence, right? It is to have us understand who we are. And in fact, the biggest conversation is that our DNA upshifts to a crystalline, we're moving from carbon-based to crystalline beings, that we lighten up, that we become eternal beings, that there no longer has to be death or disease, that we can make choices about whether we live on the planet, whether we leave our bodies, whether we have to engage in this human experience as it is, or whether we create some, utopian way of being as higher vibrating, more etheric beings. This is my own personal comment on that, is that might be a little boring, because isn't that what we came here for, right? I'm a kind of the Michael of that. It's like, I kind of would miss a piece of pizza every now and then. But that really is the broad conversation about why we engaged in this process. So that, I think about that every day. What is the point?
Well, because the part that kind of throws me off with the whole dynamic is, when you study teachings, one of the things they say that we grow out of duality.
Mm-hmm.
So if you cut out that negative or that down pull, how do you grow?
Again, I love the questions you're asking, because it's something that I've actually become quite annoyed by. There's people talking about, and now duality is different than when we talk about negativity, right? Because one of the fundamental things I've started working on with people is this idea of feeling all of your feelings. And again, this is very dragoness in this concept, because somebody that also works with dragons had posted something on Facebook saying, the dragons say, do not feel fear. And I had a very visceral reaction to that. And what they then had me do not really in response, but just as being a responsible deliverer of their messages, to say that they actually don't feel that way. Mm-hmm. It's not that fear is bad. There's so much talk about, if you have a negative feeling, you're going to attract negative things to your life. If you feel fear, then you're going to attract fear to your life. This, I'll just say plainly, is baloney. Again, we came to experience the full spectrum of our humanity. And if let me give you this example. Do you like to eat? Do you like food? Yeah. So me too. And I like spices, right? So imagine if you went to a restaurant or you cooked something and you only used salt. How boring would that be? Right? Like you didn't have any Cajun, or you didn't have any curry, or we came here to experience it all. So there's nothing wrong with anger expressed in a healthy way. There's nothing wrong with fear expressed in a healthy way. There's nothing wrong with grief. At the same time, there's nothing wrong with joy and happiness. If you're only feeling or expressing on one side of the spectrum, you're missing the entire other side of the spectrum. The rainbow has all the colors, right? It doesn't have just one or two or three, because that would be boring. We need to allow for all of it. When we only allow some of it, we block the rest. So if you're only wanting joy and happiness, you're actually blocking the ability to be in full harmony with your body's flow. And remember what I said is prosperity is absolutely connected to the openness of your heart. Your heart has to be open, and your heart has to feel all feelings in order to be open, a full open channel, which means it has to be allowed to feel sadness. Negativity in a healthy way, meaning I don't label things as negative or positive. It just is. Okay, so what the dragons say is it's just an experience. You humans have to label it as negative or positive. We say it's just an experience. And you have to have that experience. That's where the fire of life comes from, the spice, right? Their fire is our spice. That's where the passion comes from. So we have to allow for that. Now that's distinct from this idea of duality, because if you're feeling all feelings, isn't that the wholeness? Right? The minute you separate yourself from, I can't feel fear or negativity, you've now separated. I don't want that experience. Let's say you're in a bad mood and I say, I don't want to be around people in a bad mood. I've now separated myself from you. We are now separate. That's not unity. I've now divided myself. But if I say, let me give you a hug, I'm going to accept whatever it is that you're feeling. Doesn't mean I have to take it on. So we misunderstand, again, with this idea of duality and negativity, and I shouldn't feel this and shouldn't feel that. You are more in unity with yourself and with all things when you feel all things.
It's like what I was wondering about is because it seemed like to show that you have faith and trusting that you should be fearless. But that's not what you're saying.
No. Yeah. Because what does it mean to allow yourself to feel the fear and do it anyway? Right? I say that there's healthy fear. There's a wonderful, I remember this story so well. There's a wonderful world-class surfer who surfs like 80-foot waves in Hawaii, all over the world, but in Hawaii in particular. I mean, you can imagine being on I don't know about you, but I would be nervous to get on a surfboard and be up like 80 feet on a wave.
Definitely.
And he was asked, are you ever afraid? And he said, absolutely. He said, but it's a healthy fear. He said, it's like a race car driver. You have to have all your cylinders firing, because if I weren't at that level of alertness, I would die. So again, it's understanding how we label things. Again, this idea of being fearless, big eye roll from me. Every time I see memes that come across, my Instagram or Facebook, I just move on, because fear is a natural part of feeling things. I say it means you're alive. Wow, that makes me, I feel afraid, but I'm going to step in anyway. There's been a lot of things, even in the past 2 years, that I've just, oh my God, and then I step into it. Wow, I did that. That's that rush. And if you allow yourself that feeling and then you do it, again, you're embracing it. You're not pushing it away. So we have to allow ourselves to be on the full spectrum of that. I don't think there really is such a thing as fearlessness. I think there's an ability of feeling the feeling and then stepping forward boldly into it anyway. That's what defines courage, is it not? Is that you felt it and you still kept stepping forward.
Well, if people wanted to get in touch with you and, just enjoy your shows and your blogs and different things that your messages, how can they contact you and enjoy your presence?
There are a few ways. First, they can go to my websites. So the first one is hillaryharris.com, my name, HILLARYHARRIS.com, or prosperitycoach.com. Prosperitycoach.com may be easier to remember. It takes them to the same place. The other, and that's where they can find out about all the coaching and guiding and intuitive work. The other site that you mentioned, the Ascension 360, which we talk about not only the dragons, but also this shift that we're on, and all of my radio shows are there. There's like 50 free radio show podcasts there for people to enjoy. That's Ascension 360, so ascension360.net. And they can find me there. They can also email me. They can email me at Hillary Harris. Hillary@hillaryharris.com is probably the easiest way to email me.
You're working on a new show to add to your show too.
Well, there's lots of things that I have in the works. The podcast I've been thinking about bringing back because people have been asking about it. And again, I think that there's a need for it. I've been quiet for a while for a number of reasons. One is that as I talked about, there's so much noise out there, right? There's a lot of noise, and I didn't want to add to the noise. But because I feel like I have something different to say now that people may be ready to hear, I want to bring it back in a slightly different format. But it will still be the material that, similar to what we talked about today, just to help people ease their symptoms, but also their minds and their hearts based on what they may be struggling with. I offer courses and seminars and things on the dragon work, and they're more than welcome to look that up on that same site and check that out. There's a whole site that I'm building for just the dragons as well. And I've also been, in my spare time, wanting to pull together a show all about good news.
Yes.
And that I've been, threatening to do that for a while, and people keep asking me about it, and it's just something that I haven't had the time to do. But the news is something that I did at the end of my podcast typically, because I really think that the world is hurting for just some good news, right? Some good news for once. And so I've been threatening to do that as well. So there's a lot of things that are, percolating.
It was just so many things that we could have talked about, like you was talking about symptoms of people who are experiencing that shift going into a session. And it's like we just couldn't cover everything that could have been really beneficial. But if they visit your site, they can learn so much about it. But I was
absolutely. There's a whole page
today,
on those
so I
symptoms.
wasn't going to question you today.
Well, there's a whole page on those symptoms there, Linda,
Yeah.
and a show that I did on it. But you know what? I'd be happy to come back anytime. It was so much
Definitely
fun.
got to have you back. Definitely got to have you back.
Absolutely. I would love it.
Yes. And it's just been so soothing to my spirit just to have you here today.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that.
Yes. And Hillary, you are on the Truth Will Set You Free show. Give us a truth to remember you by.
That's a good one. The first thing that popped to mind when you talk about the truth will set you free, be your authentic self.
And that you live.
Feel your feelings and be your authentic self. Let it hang out. Let it all hang out.
Let it go.
Don't be afraid. Those who love you will love you anymore, right? They'll love you even more. And those who don't, never mind.
Wow, that's well said. Thank you so much for being on our show today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Oh, it's so refreshing. So appreciative. You got to come back.
Oh, I absolutely will. Oh, thank you so much, Linda. I really appreciate you.
Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.